can't. Thank you. I
Say that again, Professor.
fit to. I don't get. Why do I know? I only see a row of. I see 5 faces across the top of the screen, and there's a big area of the screen that is not showing anybody.
Do you see anything
well,
that looks like arrowheads to the
Maria-
left or right? Hit one of those.
If you want,
Maria, I think you can go ahead and unshare for the moment.
fair enough.
Everybody knows that we're at CELINE 15, and I think now you can see most of us, right?
No, I see you. Now I see you, Paul.
Okay.
And I.
Sid,
So-
is there a view
And,
option
I
up
see-
at the top of your screen?
I see at the top of my. Yeah. What do I do?
Click a different view.
View. Oh yeah, view. Oh, okay.
And if you select gallery, you should be able to see all of us.
Sorry. I'm sorry. Gallery. Is this on?
So at the
No.
top right of your screen, you're gonna have a view button.
View. Oh, there it is. Okay.
And you click it,
Oh,
and then
gallery
you
view.
select
Okay.
gallery. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There. That's what I was looking for. Okay.
Is it
Okay.
better? As I said earlier, they are intricate, these paths of Zoom. So
Yeah.
okay, so I think we're good to go now. We can go ahead and start. Maria, are we recording already?
Yes, we are recording.
Okay, so hello everybody again. Thank you very much for joining. Welcome to the 15th edition of CELINE, the Cercul of Neurocognitive Linguistics. I am Paul Buzila, the host of the show, as they say, and I want to thank you again for being with us today, tonight for some of us. As you know, or as some of you know, we are recording this meeting for those of our friends who cannot join, so they can watch it later. And again, I want to thank you again very much, especially because this is a special edition, because this is the 2-year anniversary edition of CELINE. So we've started this series of meetings 2 years ago. We also had a 1-year anniversary last year. Those of you who were present remember I did a sort of review back then. I won't do that now because I don't want to talk too much. But I will say 2 things. First of all, I would just like to remind you that CELINE has a page, web page, on the Center for Comparative and Cognitive Linguistics website, where you can find all the previous, the recording of all the previous meetings. Maria, if you could just briefly show this page, maybe, and maybe also put
Absolutely.
the link in the chat. So this is the page, and as you can see there, you can find all the previous meetings. If there's something that is interesting for you, you can click on it and it will open a YouTube video. If you could put the link in the chat, Maria, and then who wants to have it, you can just copy it from there. Now, the second thing I wanted to say was just to remind you the main objectives we had when we started this CELINE event. One was more general, which was to create a community of people interested in discussing language and languages from a neurological plausible perspective. And this is actually the broad sense of the phrase neurocognitive linguistics, right? And the second objective, which was a bit more specific, was to try to disseminate a particular linguistic theory, which in my view, of course, does its best to respect this neurological plausibility criterion. And I'm talking, of course, about the relational network theory, also known as neurocognitive linguistics. And this would be the narrower meaning of the phrase. Now, for those of you who are not too familiar to relational network theory, or RNT in brief, it is a theoretical model that sees language and knowledge in general as a vast interconnected network of relationships, in a nutshell. This model was proposed by Sidney Lamb, who is an American linguist, who is now Professor Emeritus of Linguistics and Cognitive Science at Rice University, and who, I'm proud to say, is also a member of our CELINE community. And as you could see, he kindly accepted for the second time my invitation to participate in a CELINE meeting. Professor Lamb, hello again, thank you again, and welcome back to CELINE.
Yeah, thank you.
I tried to describe RNT in 3 words, let's say, in a nutshell. Would you like to add anything? Maybe for those who are not too familiar with it. I mean, you know, it's always nice to hear like a sort of summary from the very person who created an idea. How would you explain, or how would you describe RNT, like in 60 seconds or so?
Okay, I started working on this in about way back in the 1960s, which seems like just a short time ago for me. I was doing, I guess how you could say I was a linguistic theoretician, and I was particularly interested in figuring out the nature of the morpheme, for example, considered to be an object with form and meaning, minimum such object. And so what is this? Well, it has always been assumed to be an object, or words. They're objects. And I was trying to figure, I was influenced by Michael Halliday, who had developed a network theory. And I finally realized that if you look at the relationships of the morpheme, if you plot out all these relationships, you have to have a diagram to do it. And it turns out that is the entirety of the object. There is no object. It's just relations. And these relations lead to other relations. Everything that seems to be a linguistic object turns out not to be an object at all, but just a point in a network of relationships. And so that was the beginning of relational network theory back in the 1960s. At that time, I had no idea about how it might be related to the brain. It was only later that I discovered that all the essential features of the networks could be represented in the brain. And that's how neurocognitive linguistics got started. Okay?
Yeah, great. So it all started basically with you trying to understand what was this object we call the morpheme in reality. So it was like trying to have a realistic approach, right?
Yes. Yeah,
that's
it was
great.
an attempt to be realistic about what language is.
Great.
And there were theories around in those days. Chomsky used to talk about competence and performance, and he admitted that his model was only a competence model. And he tried to go through a lot of convoluted arguments to show why it was okay to work with confidence models, even though there was no possibility that they could perform. But I thought that was not correct, because a model of language could not be considered plausible at all unless it could be put into operation. That means speaking and understanding.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this insight into the origins of RNT. And of course, part of the reason for which I invited you to this meeting, Professor Lamb, as you know, is the fact that recently we have managed to, let's say, celebrate R&T by dedicating a special issue of a linguistics journal edited by the University of Cuyo in Argentina, which is called Annales de Lingüística. And I had the opportunity and the honor of doing this as a guest editor, together with Daniela Soledad González from the University of Cuyo and José María Gil from the National University of Mar del Plata, both in Argentina, an old friend of R&T. Both of them are here today, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank you both so much for your collaboration on this project. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And
Thank you.
I would also like to take the opportunity to officially present this special issue. So, Maria, if you could also briefly share on the screen. Well, you can anyway, you can easily find this if you search for Annales de Lingüística on Google. And by the way, it is open access. Yeah, so you can see it on the page, journal page on the screen. It is open access, so feel free to download it and enjoy its content. It contains contributions in both English and Spanish. I think most of them are in English, signed by researchers who deal with various aspects of language from this neurocognitive perspective. Many, if not most of them, are here today for the discussion we are going to have in the second part of the meeting, and I thank them for taking the time. This issue also features the Spanish translation of one of Professor Lemb's articles, one in which he talks about the necessity of finding alternative ways of peeking into the mechanisms of language when experiments are not feasible. Also, you can find something on the history of R&T in Adolfo Garcia's contribution, who talks about the origins of the theory. And last but not least, there's also an interview with Professor Lamb, which he was kind enough to grant me in 2020 when I visited Rice University with the Fulbright grant. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. I will let you discover all the marvelous content. Right now, since they took the time to be here, I would like to thank again Daniela and Jose for allowing me to work on this. And actually, I would like to invite Daniela to tell us a few words about the journal. Daniela, you are the editor, right, of Annales de Lingüística. Can you tell us more about it and maybe about this initiative of having editors from time to time and having special issues?
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Paul, for the invitation. And thank you for organizing this meeting. The idea was from the previous director of the journal, Gisela, that she's here. I started working with Jose María Gil in a previous dossier, a previous special number that was about language and education. And after that, we continue collaborating, and he suggested me to make a new special issue with you and his exceptional collaboration too. I can, if you want, I can make like a really, really short presentation about the journal, if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, Gisela knows the journal, but maybe the rest of the people that don't. The journal Annales de Lingüística is a long-standing academic journal. It was founded in 1941 by the Catalan philologist Joan Corominas, who was also the founder of the Institute of Linguistics at the National University of Cuyo. In terms of visibility and evaluation, Anales de Lingüística is indexed in several international systems and different catalogs. I would like to highlight that the journal is committed to the academic integrity and responsible scholar publishing. And from its very beginning, the journal had an international scope. Important linguists such as Coromines himself, Leo Spitzer, Antonio Tovar, Theodor Elwert, and Salvador Canal-Fraus published in its early issues. And regarding its contents, in its first years, the journal placed a strong emphasis on etymological studies, but over time, its thematic scope expanded significantly. And today, Anales de Lingüística publishes research from a wide range of linguistic disciplines. This special number devoted to neurocognitive linguistics was coordinated by Paul Bosila with the collaboration of José María Gil, and brings together contributions by well-known scholars who explore both the theoretical foundations of this approach and its applications to different linguistic phenomena. The articles, as Paul advanced, included in the special issue, address topics such as the relationship between language and the brain, the neurocognitive basis of linguistic structure, phonological learning, syntactic and discursive phenomena, creativity, anomalous cases, and bilingual practices like code switching. Together, they offer a coherent and up-to-date view of neurocognitive linguistics as a promising and plausible framework for understanding language. I want to say thanks to Paul for the invitation, say thanks to Sidney Lam. It's an honor to be here presenting this special issue. And thank you to José María Gil, that he was all the time helping us to do everything with this special number. And thank you very much to all the colleagues that presented the investigations and people who is which is here listening to us.
Thank you very much, Daniela, for this nice and clear presentation. And again, thank you again for offering us the opportunity to have this special issue. I would also like to ask Jose to tell us a few words. Jose, you had the idea of dedicating the special issue to RNT. What can you tell us about that? How was the idea born, let's say?
Okay, thank you. And said it's very nice to see you here again. I think that Daniela has been very clear, but I could add maybe that this special issue of Análisis de Lingüística of this journal is perhaps the result of a process that has been unfolding over time. The journal and the direction of Daniela has been developing many thematic issues for years now, always focusing on topics that are both meaningful and relevant. In my particular case, as she mentioned, I've been in contact with the journal for quite a long time, but over the past few years, my involvement, my commitment with the journal became more active. About 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to contribute to a special issue on education, and it was around that moment that the key question began to emerge for us, how to identify. That question was maybe how to identify a strong theoretical core, something solid, something internationally relevant. And that's how we arrived at relational network theory, the framework developed by Sidney Lam. which is a powerful and still perhaps underexplored model of language, especially within our regional context. So from there, as Daniela mentioned before, we invited Paul Bustilda, who gently accepted as a distinguished researcher and a Fulbright scholar to serve as guest editor. His contribution was fundamental in shaping this volume and bringing together the work you see here today. Maybe I could also say that this special issue brings together contributions that show the presence and the development of relational network theory in South America, but it also connects with previous meaningful precedents. For example, we could mention the reception of Lamb's ideas even in the 60s and the 70s in a famous handbook that was published by this time by Ofelia Covacci. She was the first one to disseminate Lamb's ideas in South America and particularly in Argentina. More recently, by the beginning of the decade of 2010, the Spanish translation of Pathways of the Brain, in which Adolfo Garcia played an outstanding role. I think that this publication also helped to make this framework more accessible. And of course, we should also mention the visit of Professor Lamb to Argentina in 2011, particularly to Mar del Plata and Mendoza, which is the home of this journal. This is also a very important milestone. This is a milestone in this trajectory. So I could say finally that this volume is not only a collection of papers, it's a part of an ongoing conversation and that connects people, ideas, and moments across the time. For me, it has been a pleasure, an honor to be part of this project, and I believe that publications like this will continue to strengthen the position of this journal of analysis of linguistics, of Analysis de Lingüística, a journal that clearly maintains, as Soledad said before, the line of academic rigor and prestige established by its founder, Joan Coromines. So thank you very much, and I'm anxious to listen to the presentations of Seth and of the rest of my colleagues. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Jose, again for your words. And again for your collaboration, which was very important. Once again, I would like also to thank Professor Lamb for giving us the opportunity of gathering these nice contributions focused on your theory. By the way, I think you had the opportunity to take a look at this special issue, did you? Do you have any thoughts you want to share on it with us?
Oh, I think all I'd say is that it's wonderful to see this. I thank everyone for their contributions. I think I'll just let it go with that.
Okay. Well, thank you again. And actually, I'm glad that many of the authors, maybe all the authors, because I see Adolfo as well. Hello, Adolfo. Welcome. I'm glad that you could make it today because, as it was announced, I wanted to have also, besides this presentation of the journal, I also wanted to have a sort of roundtable discussion with everybody who participated in this special issue. The idea would be to get an idea of how each of us finds R&D interesting or useful for our research, and in that way, hopefully, we will get a better view on how R&D is contributing today and how it can contribute to future research in linguistics, and why not maybe in neuroscience in general. So I would go ahead and start this part of the meeting, the roundtable, let's say. But before we do that, if you will allow me, I will introduce our guests, our specialists tonight. First of all, of course, we have Professor Lamb, who needs no further introduction. Thank you again for joining us. And then, in alphabetical order, let's say, we have with us, firstly, Cristina Chiusano from the University of Montevideo, Uruguay. Cristina, welcome. If you allow me, I will just mention that she's with us one day after her PhD presentation, right? So I assume it was a successful one, and we can all congratulate you on it.
Thank you.
Yes, so thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite.
Yeah. Then we have Adolfo Garcia, who has several affiliations from University of San Andres, Argentina, from University of California, San Francisco in USA, Trinity College, Dublin, Ireland, Universidad de Santiago, Chile, and also from CONICET, if I'm not mistaken, right? The National Council of Research in Argentina. Adolfo, thanks a lot for taking the time to be with us tonight.
Thank you, Paul.
Great. We have Jose, whom we have just heard. Jose, as I mentioned earlier, is from the National University of Mar del Plata, also affiliated to the same council, CONICET. Welcome again, Jose. We have, I'm not sure if we have Herminia with us. No, unfortunately, she couldn't make it. But we do have Pedro Luis Lucchini from the National University of Mar del Plata, Argentina. Thank you for joining us. Pedro Luis was, if I'm not wrong, Christina's PhD advisor, right? So congratulations to you both on.
Okay. Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you. And finally, we have Gisela Elina Müller from the National University of Cuyo, Argentina. She's also the director of the Instituto de Lingüística Juan Corominas, that was mentioned earlier, which is the institute that publishes Anales de Lingüística. So Gisela, thank you for being with us. Thank you for offering us the possibility of doing this special issue, and welcome.
Thank you to you, Paul, and Sydney. Of course. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I prepared some questions for each of you, of course, just to have like a place to start the discussion. But of course, I would like, or we want to make this as interactive as possible. So if you want to say something at any time, don't hesitate to jump in, right? You don't have necessarily to wait until I address you, in particular the question. And at the end, we will also have a Q&A session for the people in the audience. So make sure you stay tuned, make sure you take notes if you want to ask something. We will offer this possibility and hopefully have an interactive discussion at the end. So again, Professor Lamb, I will start with you. And I would like to ask you about this. When you began your work, I know you saw language, as you said several times, as a gateway to understanding the mind, a perspective that maybe was not very common in linguistics at that moment. So since then, how has the relationship between linguistics and neuroscience evolved, in your opinion? Do you see a real synthesis between the study of language and the study of the brain today, or do you think there's still a long way to go?
Well, to be brief, I think there's still a long way to go. There certainly is not the opposition to looking at the brain and the mind that there was in the days when I got started in linguistics. In those days, Benjamin Lee Whorf's work was considered controversial. Most people rejected it because it wasn't considered to be scientific to look at the mind in relation to language. And today, I think people take the opposite view. Of course, the language is a primary I don't know the word to use, but the mind and language are so intricately intertwined that is more and more recognized nowadays. Nevertheless, there's a long way to go. The neuroscience is such a huge field. Different people study different things. The part of neuroscience that is the branch of neuroscience that is relevant to linguistics is cognitive neuroscience. That's a field that only got started officially a couple of decades ago. And immediately there was great interest. They formed in the United States, a Society for Cognitive Neuroscience. And within a couple of years, the attendance at its annual meeting had grown to about 4,000 people. And now it's even bigger. So there's obviously a great interest. They haven't kept up to date with what they're doing, but as far as I know, they're still not paying enough attention to linguistics.
Mm-hmm. Would you say you envisioned this change, or did things change faster or more slowly than you expected?
Well, I guess I would say more slowly than I expected.
Okay.
I expected, for instance, that my book Pathways of the Brain would get. I was naive. I thought it would get attention from the cognitive neuroscientists, but they, for the most part, have never heard of it. They have so much literature that they are producing on their own. I think they have no time or interest in looking outside of their own sphere. And they don't realize how closely related linguistics is. So they're not, as I say, they haven't even heard of that. My work has been around for 20 years now. So in that sense, there's a long way to go.
Yeah. Well, these kind of initiatives that, like the one that we are having, maybe can, bring our, how do you call that, our thread of sand, try to make things a bit more visible. Well, thanks. I would turn to Adolfo, because what you said, I think connects a bit with Adolfo's activity and work. So I remember, Adolfo, in last year, actually, in our first anniversary, when you also participated, you noted that Professor Lam's work was pivotal in sparking your interest in neuroscience, leading to your, let's say, dual profile as both a linguist and a neuroscientist. Now, from this special vantage point, how do you perceive the current state of the relationship between these two disciplines? In your experience, what are the main obstacles to building a robust bridge between them? And I'm just throwing in several questions there. And why is a neurological understanding of language still something so difficult to obtain?
Wow, that was a mouthful.
Yeah. I hope you took notes.
You're taxing my working memory here, so I'll do my best.
I can repeat some of them if you want.
I may ask you to reprise some of those, but great to see you, Sid, and great to see everyone. That dual role you mentioned, I guess that's true. I'm an imposter linguist in the face of the neuroscientists, and an imposter neuroscientist in the face of the linguists. So I guess that's a fair description. It is true that Sid's work inspired my interest in the brain. It was pivotal in that sense. So the relationship between the two fields is it's multifarious, I should say. First, there's no such a thing as a single point of connection. So there are neurolinguists who come with a core background in linguistics, and then they take an interest in neurology. There are some people who come from neuroscience, and then they take some level of interest in linguistics. There are people who come from neither side, usually the cognitive sciences in general or psychology, and they become interested in language and the brain, and that's their point of entry. In all cases, people try to draw from the traditions that they were sort of trained in to try to create those theoretical and sometimes empirical links. So here we talk about neurocognitive linguistics here in the narrow sense that Sid proposed for his own particular flavor of it, but there are many guises of neurocognitive linguistics if you take a broader view. And these are very different and often incompatible with one another, in the sense that there are people who draw from constructs and they take constructs from different traditions to be true, or at least pragmatically usable, to try to find neural correlates of the speech and language behavior that characterizes us. Some people draw from constructs from the minimalist program. Some people do it from earlier phrase structure rules, grammars. Fewer people are drawing from cognitive grammar or cognitive linguistics in the Lanacarian sense of the term. Tommy, Givon, all that. There have been some works in that in that line, and oftentimes many people pursue neurocognitive experiments around language without really committing to any specific linguistic trend, tradition, or framework. Some people just work on the basis of basic structural categories, which are probably by all accounts natural kinds of linguistics by now, and then the interests that people pursue in neuroscientific study, in the neuroscientific study of language, are very, very different. Sometimes the lack of deep theoretical commitment to or understanding of the gnosiological, epistemological, theoretical and meta-theoretical foundations of specific linguistic frameworks are detrimental to their pursuits when they are interested in modeling specific phenomena from a more descriptive or even explanatory stance. But sometimes when you have more applicable, more concrete, more translational goals, such as trying to come up with measures of language that are indicative of early alterations in neural circuits that can contribute to the prodromal or preclinical detection of disorders, that can help you to monitor disease progression. There are many contributions which are theoretically poor or even blind, if you will, but still pragmatically usable to the point that they are informing diagnostic procedures and they are making their way into patients' clinical histories. So they have a real world impact. So I guess it's very diverse, that connection between the two fields. And if anything, the very use of a singular noun here, connection, maybe does a disservice to the plurality of intersections that this synergy involves.
Wow, so you did great in answering all my questions. Thank you. Actually, I would just like to ask a further clarification maybe, because I also noticed something that you mentioned, like neuroscientists maybe, or cognitive scientists who become at a certain point interested in language. They have this, let's say, approach by looking to linguistics and say, okay, what's the mainstream theory, the most famous theory? Okay, I will try to find neural correlates for that theory. that do happens a lot. So do you think that this kind of thing is also, I don't know, has to do something with fashion or I don't know how to call it, what's the most famous theory or the most famous model at a certain moment in history? Is that something that helps interdisciplinarity, or how do you see this?
I'm not so sure. I think so. I think there may be a tendency for people to sort of latch on onto the funkiest, most visible theory at a given point in time. The problem sometimes, I think, has to do with the very epistemological foundations of those pursuits, irrespective of what that theory is. More often than not, there are two problems. First, the very assumption that analytical descriptions of language behavior and these abstract categories that descriptive theories come up with, that they can be directly implemented in the brain. That's a problem in itself. You might even argue that it's a counterfactual assumption, and that's something that SIDS has communicated from the very beginning very eloquently, I think. The second point has to do with another sort of epistemological, methodological, let's say, pitfall, which is assuming that because you manipulate a certain variable in your linguistic stimuli, let's say, I don't know, the distinction between passive and active voice, or the contrast between nouns and verbs, or whatever, inflection in verbs, whatever it might be. You come up with a number of stimuli, you take a look at different brain responses to one condition and the other, you run some statistical tests, you ascertain that whatever measure of brain activity you're looking at is significantly different between those two conditions, and then you conclude, all right, so I found here, first of all, there have been claims along the lines of this attests to the neurological reality of this construct or this contrast, which really it does not follow from the data. The fact that the brain responds differently to two different sets of things does not really attest to the neurocognitive reality or plausibility of that construct in biological terms. And I think that in doing things like that, people are more of, these are the types of conclusions which rest more on your interpretation than on the data. The fact that interpretations rest more on interpretation that the data, I think, is true for everyone, but you can have different degrees of reliance here. And it often happens when you have people who have become advocates of or convinced by a specific linguistic framework, that when they run a neurocognitive experiment and they see differences in brain activation or some sort of correlate or association, they are tempted beyond what the data actually warrants to assume that is somehow supporting the theoretical matrix of the framework they're working on. And it does not follow because of this, and let alone causal or mechanistic claims that are sometimes advanced. That's another pitfall. People often tend to come up with things like, oh, because we've seen this difference in this oscillatory pattern in the low beta range, this suggests that low beta oscillations are causing our receptivity to whatever it might be, the passive voice or something like that. And it's really it does not follow from the data in any way. So yeah, I think there might be a tendency for people to sort of hop on the hottest train out there, and I think that sometimes this is because those mainstream theories are appealing, they are compelling, they are attractive, and they sometimes lead people to assume that the goal of questioning or trying to ascertain the plausibility, even the descriptive plausibility of that part of the equation, the linguistic part of the equation, is taken care of. So all we have to do now is see how this maps onto the brain without even questioning whether those descriptive points of departure are useful, valid, or not.
Yeah. And last but not least, and especially lately, one reason might be that if you work on a very quotable theory, your work becomes very quotable, right? So, you know,
there's been a hype now. I mean, never before. So there are a couple of bibliometric studies that are interesting that have popped up in the last couple of weeks. First, since the emergence of LLMs in the last few months, you see that there's a 40% increase in works devoted to LLMs are accounting for 40% of the publications in the last 2 months in fields like cognitive science, behavioral science, computer science, and whatnot. And when you take a look at the diversity of the topics that are being explored in the last 2 months relative to, let's say, an average of 2 years before, you see that the diversity of topics has become much more narrower. People are focusing more, they're working more focally on these hot topics, right? And LLMs, I think, even though you can't say that they are a theory, but they are a technological development, which is sparing many reflections on what language is, what the nature of language is. It's being used to even inspire reflections on linguistic theories and whatnot. There are studies from very prominent scientists claiming that because LLMs can emulate natural language so efficiently at some point, then looking at the inner structure of the models that produce that behavior will give you the cleanest, best ever insights into the actual workings of natural language production in humans. And even neurologically, there are studies that are finding patterns of association between the levels of variance in the inner loops and layers of the models that inform LLMs and patterns of variance in hemodynamic or electrophysiological activity in the brain. And they are concluding that because of these associations, what LLMs do not only mirrors what's happening within humans cognitively, but also neurobiologically. And it does not follow. It just does not follow. People are focusing more on LLMs as the go-to model through which to understand what we do linguistically. And they are also falling trap of the same pitfalls that I just alluded to before. Just because two systems are capable of producing partially similar outward results, it does not mean that their inner workings must be commensurable. And people all too often fall prey to these hypes and trends, and in the need and the legitimate pursuit of understanding the human brain, they just they feel content with assuming that whatever the latest gadget out there is really represents how we humans do things. And it's really an exercise in historical myopia, if I will, in the sense that this has happened all too often throughout history. We've likened the inner workings of language production, comprehension, acquisition, and loss to how computers work, to serial Markovian chains, exactly, to binary systems, to different types of semantic networks. And now the latest, coolest, most appealing metaphor is that of large language models. But it will be only a matter of time for something new to pop up so that we abandon this illusion and sort of hop on to the next.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think you mentioned, I was going to mention as well, it is really a hype, as Dan Mailman also put it in the chat. Yeah, it's about the hype. Okay, as I said, if anyone would like to comment or
John has a question from the chat.
Yes, I saw that, and maybe we can link that to some of the questions I had for the next people, because I think it's related to some of the contributions in the journal, some of the research that some of us are doing. So if an answer to John's question in the chat does not come in the next half an hour, maybe we can rephrase it at the end as during the Q&A session. Because right now I was going to turn the attention back to linguistics per se, and I was going to ask Cristina and Pedro, and Pedro Luis, since they have been working together. I know your collaborative research in this special issue of Annales de Lingüística provides an interesting insight into phonology acquisition. So could you both elaborate on what led you to adopt this R&T framework, let's say, specifically, how does R&T illuminate the complex cognitive processes involved when Spanish speakers acquire English phonology? I think that was the topic of your contribution, right?
Yes, exactly. Well, the work was a result of a tiny little bit of my doctoral research. Actually, it was because of a talk I had with Jose. I don't know where you are, because I was looking for a plausible explanation for the linguistic phenomena that I had seen. I studied how two pedagogical approaches for the teaching of pronunciation had an impact on the acquisition of the 4 English front vowels in students from Montevideo, Uruguay. And well, I had been reading different frameworks, and I was still, eager to keep on exploring the reasons why I had certain results. Well, and after talking to Jose, he introduced me to the R&T. I started reading, and I decided to include that in my research. I talked to Pedro, he agreed. And well, what we were able to see was that the theory let us describe pronunciation learning as changes inside an interconnected mental network. So it was not the result of just trying to copy, emulate sounds or building new muscle habits, which is what traditional pronunciation instruction made us believe. So within the R&T framework, we understood that language works as an interconnected system of nodes that become stronger or weaker depending on experience, and that these connections link perception, articulation, and meaning. So what we discovered was that for each of the, like, Spanish has a relatively simple vowel system. We have it's a very symmetric system. It consists of 5 vowel sounds, compared to the model that I was using for teaching, that was general British model, that at least is made up of 12 vowel sounds that have no direct correlate with our Spanish vowel sounds. So what I could evidence that was that after the teaching for both of the groups that were exposed to different pedagogical approaches, we were able to observe improvements, but there were certain key sounds, like the long E as in beat and the A as in cat. Well, those were the 2 most problematic sounds. And looking into the R&T, we were able to conclude that it is possible to to analyze and discuss results in light of the theory. Because what we said was like, okay, learners often start using their L1 networks and they collapse several English sounds into just one Spanish category. So, for instance, for the two E sounds, they came up with an assimilated or Spanish sound that causes phonological ambiguity. And well, within the realms that I was doing my research, that was translation and interpreting, very demanding contexts, we were able to come up with this new with the conclusion that after the implementation of the two pedagogical approaches, we were able to come up with the conclusion that although phonological training nowadays tends to be geared by the intelligibility principle, and probably because of the influence of communicative approaches that have tried to remove all phonological training from instruction, which was a really big gap of the of that pedagogy. We said, okay, probably so as to strengthen L2 nodes and aid students, we need to start thinking about what results the R&T, the readings that the R&T lets us give to the findings. So what we found that we could have we could have highlights of two key processes, right? First, the mechanisms that drive the reorganization of phonological networks, and second, how those we could explain how those processes of phonological reorganization as something that emerge gradually through instruction and use. And instruction doesn't necessarily have to be all communicative. In terms of phonology, we do adhere to the intelligibility principle, but instead of forgetting about the tradition, it's not about eliminating traditional approaches. By traditional, I mean the typical listen and repeat type of instruction. We could actually find that traditional focused on form instruction aids learning, aids acquisition of the segmental features of key sounds that, especially in adult learners, that need to that have they're utilizing their working memory. And so traditional practice contributes to as a complementary mechanism, because controlled repetition activates the same sound motor pathways and reinforces connections between articulatory gestures and acoustic correlates. So the repeated activation helps consolidate those emerging phonological representations that students need to acquire the L2, in this case, English phonological system. I don't know if Pedro wants to add something else.
Yeah, thanks, Cristina, for that. I mean, it shows your enthusiasm for this topic. Thanks. So, Luis, do you want to add something to that?
Just simply that I'm also interested in teaching phonetics and phonology, but I'm more of the suprasegmental type of interested in and oriented in. When Cristina came up with this idea of replicating part of the study that I had conducted in my PhD dissertation many years ago with suprasegmentals, and she wanted to explore how segmentals behaved in the particular context, we thought it would be an interesting idea to go through the different the evolution that pronunciation, instruction, and learning has been through, and then we got to the point that we had to discuss neurosciences. We thought it would be interesting to include neurosciences, and more specifically because Jose was involved in that part too. So we thought, well, let's ask Jose to help us, give us a hand with that. And then we came up with the closure of the thesis was dedicated to RNT theory, and then we ended up with the conflation of different theories in different aspects in that dissertation, and for example, intelligibility, the principle of intelligibility, the principle of nativeness, the nativeness theory, complex adaptive system theory, the speech learning model by Flaggy, and levels theory of speech learning. It was interesting to see the correlation, some areas of convergence between all those theories. And what these theories let us see was that phonology, as a network of connections, not just isolated sounds. So we thought it would be interesting to push learners to link sound, features, and meaning and communication as a result. And so we scaffolded complexity and we help learners from an adaptive pattern system that evolves as they use language the way it is. But then we focus on intelligibility as the guiding principle for teaching pronunciation, and we saw that we could create key cognitive links, forming stable nodes and between sound, features, and meanings. But we also saw that while intelligibility is crucial, we also, going back to what Christina said before, it should be complemented with broader phonological refinement. And here comes the more traditional mechanic control type of activities that are necessary to achieve a balanced approach. The risk it's through this theory, RNT, we could see that relying too much on intelligibility, and this is something that we highlight in the article that got published in the Analítica Lingüística, is that students might reach a plateau, and once they see that they are understandable, or that they understand, and they might not want to push themselves to refine subtle contrast or nuances of language, which eventually might lead on to breakdowns in communication. So we thought that as part of the recommendations or pedagogical implications of the thesis and of the article that got published in the Analítica Lingüística, that a balanced approach would be the ideal approach. So relying on intelligibility, because this is the ultimate end, achieving understandable communication, but at the same time, targeting specific particular aspects of language with more controlled practice, like using covert rehearsal practice for particular aspects of language, focusing on form, so that eventually students would be able to automatize those particular aspects and then bring them in their language communicative scenarios whenever they need them.
Yes,
So,
thank you. Yeah.
There's much more that we can say, but I think that
of course. But I think that your contribution is a very good example of how RNT can even describe parts of the language, of the structure of a certain language, and I think that was part of the question that we had in the chat. And I noticed that Adolfo very kindly shared some information on that. Actually, he's referring to this book I have right here. So, John, that's also a good resource. And I think actually that most of the contributions in our special issue are in some way similar to what Adolfo was mentioning there in the chat as being the second part of this book. That is,
I want that. I want that book. I've been on Amazon the past few minutes trying to reestablish my account and get that thing. I want that book.
Yeah, I
Thank you.
think I got mine from Amazon too. So, and then our contributions in the Lingüística, you just can read them because they are open access. And yeah, so Cristina and Luis' contribution, as I said, applied R&T to this part of Spanish and English actually language, which would be the phonological level, which is almost at the, let's say, interface of the linguistic system with the world, right? As Professor Lambs puts it in his book. And turning maybe to the other interface, at the other end of the linguistic structure, I would turn to Gisela now, because besides having a long-standing association with relational network theory, I know that your expertise in semantic processes is well regarded. So I know that you are looking into meanings, right? So could you share with us what originally drew you to this specific theoretical model, and how has R&T shaped your current research and your understanding of how meaning is constructed?
Okay, thank you. Well, I will begin by answering your first question, just briefly, because you asked ourselves what originally drew you to this specific theoretical model. I must say that I owe my first exposure to Sidney Lamb's theory to Jose Maria Gil, who sent me the first draft of his translations of Pathways of the Brain. It was he who told me about the Lacus Conference in 1909 in Claremont, California. He knew of my interest in Langacker and his cognitive grammar, and my recent enthusiasm for Lamb's neurocognitive theory. There, I had the privilege of hearing Lamb present his ideas on the interpretation of semantic prototypes in terms of relational networks. That was very interesting for me. Later, I could meet Adolfo Garcia and hear his work presented at various events. Later still, I would see Lamb again in person in Mendoza, where he gave a series of lectures that are still fondly remembered in our community. Well, I just jumped to the second part. My previous theoretical training had led me to read grammatical analysis developed in the field of cognitive linguistics. We know now that it was Lamb who first used this term in the early 1970s. What attracted me to these approaches was their questioning of certain traditional molds, just as Lamb does. Syntax and semantics form an indissoluble union. A dynamic conception of grammar was defended, in which the temporal dimension was considered a crucial factor in the apprehension of linguistic structures, evident in concepts such as compositional path or focus chain. Importance was also given to perceptual processes, as Lamb does also. Hence, the analytical categories linked to the conception of images, figure and ground, scale and scope, perspective. In short, analysis from this perspective made it possible to highlight the different ways of conceptualizing the same reality. Later, I would learn from Lamb that there is a reason behind these constructive alternatives, namely that no two brains are alike, nor are two brain systems that process information in the same way, and that the primacy of certain forms and meanings was related to different activation forces of the nodes and the connections involved. As I delved deeper into his theory, I became convinced of the need to find neurocognitive foundations for those ideas of cognitive grammar and semantics that seems to be in line with the real ways of speaking and understanding. Reading the first chapter of Pathways of the Brain, The Window of the Mind, was the gateway to a fascinating world for several reasons. First, the challenge of setting aside assumptions deeply rooted in linguistic imagination. For example, the idea of an object applied to a linguistic entity. Second, the writing style of Sidney Lamb that engages the reader and gradually introduces them to the subject matter. Third, the use of epigraphs as a tribute and recognition to those linguists who had brilliant insights and who, if they were alive today, would surely be followers of Lamb. He recognizes Louis Hjelmslev, for example, Saussure, Sapir, etc. Last but not least, the vindication and due importance given to indirect source linguistic evidence in scientific research on brain function. This was the first part of, and in this, specifically in this volume of Análisis de Lingüística, I wrote about the title of my contribution was a neurocognitive approach to two syntactic discursive phenomena, relational network theory in dialogue with cognitive grammar. Well, in simple terms, what caught my attention was the alternative view of Sidney Lamb of syntax and semantics. We must say that in the first part of his book, he analyzed syntax of following the categories of analytical syntax. But then in chapter 14, he asked a very simple question, a very basic question. He asked himself, why don't we think about sequence management, or why is important this concept in particular? And he answered that that is important in order to deal with two kinds of situations. First of all, for fixed, that is lexicalized combinations such as hot dog, and for new combinations, any adjective followed by a noun. And bueno, he presented, he also came back to some basic concepts like complex lexeme, mutable lexemes, and I found this particularly very useful for understanding, for example, ellipses in Spanish. You have a classical example of Langacker. He puts this example. John, suppose I don't remember, but no, John buys a car. Alicia bought a car, a Mercedes. And in descriptive grammar, traditional descriptive grammar would treat these two sentences as an ellipsis phenomenon in terms of redundancy. We don't need to repeat Alice bought a Mercedes because we put Alice bought a car, a Mercedes. And I think it's not following his theory. One of my proposals is that you have here a complex lexeme or a mutable lexeme in proper words, and a mutable sememe. These both structures could be represented in a nection, call it constructional nection or whatever. Constructional would be an appropriate term, I think, or logocomplex nection could be also. this is another way to explain syntax. Discursive syntax. Syntax is not a question of isolated sentences, but a phenomenon, a discursive phenomenon. You have sentences that are very close connected, and you need represented it at a higher level in neurocognitive terms. This is only an example. I applied several notions of Sidney Lamb's theory to other phenomena, but I don't think we have parenthetical constructions and the need to reassume certain terms in some contexts and not in other contexts. So I think I am speaking too much, but I don't know if you want some details furthermore. That's my
Well, first of all,
ideas in general.
if I may, that's very interesting, and actually I'm happy that Gisela accepted my invitation for the next edition of CELINE, so she will be able to explain into more details her research. And if you are interested, you are welcome to join us next month. I will send the invitation a bit later. I don't know. I just feel like Professor Lamb, you should have a sort of right of reply to everything Gisela said. If you want to say anything about what she just mentioned, or anyone, if you want to add to this.
I'll leave it to others.
Okay.
I'm getting it to be a little bit of hard of hearing, so I had a hard time.
Okay.
No fault of Gisela. That was a very clear explanation. Very interesting stuff. Thank you.
Oh, thank you to you, Sid. I have a question in the chat. Does Gisela have a paper where with these proposed node types? Is there or PDF? Yes, I have this contribution in analysis, and I have another paper, recent paper, because I have another previous work too, in Visitas al Patio review. It's in Spanish, but it is in the same line. I analyze another Spanish grammar phenomena, and I systematize a comparison between cognitive grammar and relational network theory. Some concepts I try to systematize in a sort of schema. Yes, I don't remember the title is Montaje Estructural, o sea, Structural Assemblies and Managed Sequences, Aspect of the Dynamic Visions of Cognitive Grammar in the Light of a Relational Network Theory of Sidney Lamb. That is the title of another article.
Well, yes. Gisela, I will ask all these details. You can send them to me by mail, and then, as always, when I send the email to everybody, I can put all these details, all these links in and
yes,
for people.
And I would say, last, the theory of Sidney Lamb have changed my mind in research, but also in my way of teaching. I usually begin my classes in theoretical linguistics with Sidney Lamb with the first chapter of Pathways of the Brain. I think it is very clear to understand the history of linguistics and many general notions, and then to get inside his theory. So we start by the end, and then we start by the end of the units, because neurocognitive unit is at the end of the program. But I begin with Sidney Lamb, and then I come back to Saussure, Sapir, And the epigraphes was a very useful resource to do this to these flashbacks and downward and come to the present, let's to say.
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also like the fact that you mentioned that also for you, the point of contact with the RNT was Jose again. So a lot of roads seems to be leading to you, Jose. I would talk to you now maybe, and I know you have dedicated part of your work to utilizing this framework to the so-called anomalous cases. That is the various speech errors that occur in natural communication. So can you explain why these deviations are so scientifically significant in the first place for linguistics? And then what is it about the architecture of RNT that allows you to explain these cases better, or I don't know, in a more efficient way compared to other traditional models like I don't know, generative, structural, cognitive models?
Okay, thank you for the question. First of all, it can be said that such anomalous cases, for example, misunderstandings, unintended puns, lapsus linguae, are interesting themselves because, first of all, they constitute a set of data that simply cannot be accounted for by other linguistic theories. They have been traditionally considered problems or themes that could be explained in terms of semiotics, psychoanalysis, magic, magic terms, religion, I don't know. But some people traditionally consider that, for example, lapsus linguae or unintended puns or particularly lapsus linguae, unintended puns, were not simply scientific data. On the contrary, if you work within the framework of relational network theory, they are not only very interesting set of data, but also samples of language utterances that allow linguistic theory to account for the relationship between the levels of meanings, lexical grammar, and phonology. So we have here that, as Lamb has suggested many times, that linguistic theory has to be realistic. This is a very strong epistemological commitment because as biology, physics, chemistry, natural sciences are demanded in terms of accounting for natural world, linguistic theory has the commitment to account for all linguistic phenomena. And this is something that maybe relational network theory is able to do because it's successful in accounting for some linguistic phenomena that simply other theories have to discard, have to obscure, have to abandon. And this is maybe we could say that there are that this linguistic evidence is very important in order to consider an epistemological problem that is, as I have mentioned, the fact that relational network theory is successful in explaining phenomena that other theories have to discard. And on the other hand, it is linguistic evidence that is useful to recognize how the linguistic system is organized and how linguistic production and linguistic recognition operate. Dealing with this aspect, I could also later copy in the chat a couple of simple accounts of parts of the grammar in relational terms. There is a description of the Spanish noun phrase in the Australian Journal of Linguistics, and a relatively recent publication about linguistic structures in Mapudungun, which is the language of the Mapuche people in South America, which is also interesting because it shows how relational network theory is able to account linguistic structures in different languages, of course. So I don't know if by means of these words I have been able to say something about the first part of the question, which was about the scientific relevance of the so-called anomalous data. I could also share the screen in order to explain some of these examples, maybe. Okay. I don't know if I am sharing.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. Okay, in the article that has been published in Annales de Lingüística has this title, The Relational Nature of Language as Revealed Through Anomalous and Creative Cases. And it considers several cases, misunderstandings, linguistic errors, conceptual errors, Freudian slips or lapsus linguae, unintended puns, and intentional puns, poetic creativity. It's also interesting that the so-called anomalous cases, on the one hand, have been abandoned and have been considered as odd cases that should not be studied by linguistic theory, or simply by different reasons. One of the main reasons for that has been that linguistic communication is identified with the transmission and the recognition of intentional meanings. That this is the strong tradition of pragmatics, for example, of the so-called philosophical cognitive pragmatics, which is strongly represented by relevance theory. Such mainstream in linguistic and philosophical studies simply abandon unintended meanings because they assume that unintended meanings are not part of genuine communication. But it's very odd because we can see that cases like unintended puns and Freudian slips are, in fact, pieces of linguistic evidence. In this sense, for example, Lamb in Pathways of the Brain analyzes a very interesting, a very revealing example. This is at the very beginning of Pathways of the Brain. Lamb suggests precisely that most current linguistic theories fail when considering different types of the so-called anomalous utterances, which in fact reveal valuable information about the structure and the function of the mental system, which underlies our linguistic abilities. And he mentions slips of the tongue, errors, and intentional puns. And in chapter 11, whose title is Traveling the Pathways, he provides the following example, taken from Lederer. There is an attorney who asks, Mrs. Jones, is your appearance here this morning pursuant to a deposition notice which I sent to your attorney? And the witness answers, no, this is how I dress when I go to work. Okay. This misunderstanding can be explained in terms of relational networks, because you can establish a difference between the linguistic system of the attorney and the linguistic system of the witness, here in general terms, which could be interpreted like the devices of narrow notation. We can see that the meaning that has been strongly activated in the linguistic system of the attorney is presence in law court, and that's why it sends activation to the lexical node corresponding for appearance. We have gray light lines, which could also send activation to other lexical nodes, but they have not been strongly activated in the linguistic system of the attorney. But on the other hand, we have that the phonological activation of appearance sends its activation to the lexical node of appearance, which in turn sends activation to different nodes of the sememic system or of the conceptual system. The node that has received more activation in the witness linguistic system has been look and not arrival or performance or something else. This is a relatively simple way of representing how we can account for a linguistic phenomenon like misunderstanding in this case. The linguistic system of the speaker is not the same of the linguistic system of the hearer. In fact, the things that should be explained are the particular cases of successful communication, but not of miscommunication or misunderstanding. This is just a simple case by means of which we can consider how relational network theory is strong enough to account for communication, for linguistic system, and for for the so-called anomalous cases, which are interesting in themselves as linguistic evidence and as a signal, as an index of the epistemological value of this theory. In other cases, this article considers many cases. There are other ones, some of them in Spanish, there is some in English, there is one in German, a couple of examples in Mapudungun, the language of the Mapuche people in Argentina and Chile. And perhaps we could also consider how relational network theory accounts for this complex and also very interesting phenomenon, which could be called linguistic creativity. Linguistic creativity, we know in generative terms, is explained in the narrow framework of syntax. According to Chomsky, creativity has to do with the capacity, with linguistic competence, which could be defined as the capacity of speakers to produce syntactic structures which are new, that have the syntactic structures that had not been part of linguistic stimuli for those speakers which are able to produce them. But this is a very narrow, a very short-minded definition of linguistic creativity. In fact, thanks to relational network theory, we can see that linguistic creativity is based on the capacity of the speakers of establishing new connections between nodes of different linguistic levels. Here we have a simple example. It's the name of a liquor store whose name is Schnapsidee in German. Schnapsidee in German is literally, or in its common meaning, is crazy idea here. But as the name of a liquor store is very creative because it's combining the morphemes Schnaps and Idee. Schnaps is liquor, Idee is idea. So Schnapsidee connects both to the name, which can be associated with meanings like fun or store, and also crazy idea. That's how these two examples, the one of misunderstanding and the one of this liquor store name, maybe help us to begin to consider how relational network theory is successful when considering unintended meanings and intended meanings in one of the most complex cases that maybe we consider, which is linguistic creativity.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jose. And talking about slips of tongue, I have a very nice story with one of my slips of tongue. I told it before in CELINE, but I realized after that I told it wrong. So if you allow me 2 minutes, I'll try to retell it now in the correct way. So back in like 20 years ago, I was teaching Spanish in South Carolina, and a slip of tongue happened to me, and now I realize how well R&T would describe what happened then. So the situation was the following. I was trying to get students to take out a sheet of paper, right? So as I was approaching the moment when I was supposed to ask them that, I kind of began to feel some panic because I thought in my mind, what if I don't pronounce sheet right? No, it's what if they will hear shit? Okay, so then I thought, let's say piece of paper instead of that, because maybe that's safer. So I was having all these thoughts while my sentence was approaching the moment where I was about to ask them to take out the piece of paper or the sheet of paper. And when I got to the moment, I just said, okay, now everybody take out a piece of shit. And everybody, all the classroom was like, what? And I think you have there some competing pathways that were coactive. And I think it would be a very, the good example, Jose, for you to explain your next article. So, yeah. Okay. So, coming back, you mentioned, Jose, this Mapuche language, and I know that in our special issue, there's also a review of a book about Mapuche that Herminia wrote. Now, I wasn't paying attention. Has Herminia joined meanwhile? Herminia, are you here?
No, she's not here. She told me that she was not going to be able to be here.
Okay, no problem. Yeah. Well, I had some question for her, but then we can skip. And actually, I have one last question for everybody. I mean, for everybody who participate in this special issue, and maybe also for people in the audience. So I will just go ahead as the question, and whoever wants or whoever has a possible answer, you can try to say your idea. So the question goes like that. So given your experience, your research, it is clear that you view relational network theory as a plausible, highly plausible and powerful model of language. Now, from your perspective and based on your interactions with a broader scientific community, let's say, what is the current level of adoption of R&T in linguistic research, in your opinion? And what do you think, what would be the next strategic steps, let's say, to be taken to further disseminate this framework and maybe encourage its use among our fellow researchers and maybe the next generation of linguists? Maybe I'm not even having the right approach, but that's basically my curiosity. So what's your view on that? Who wants to go?
I was interested in Adolfo mentioning LLMs as models of whatever theory you want, anyway, of how the human mind works. I think, in fact, I had started on this dissertation, but then my faculty member left, and I had to switch this. The first dissertation I was working on was called Neuroplausible Machine Translation, and the idea was to take the GPUs that NVIDIA produces and make each one of the little stupid computers that comprise them into an exact replica of one of the 8 or 10 node types that it came up with, right? And that would give you an alternative to LLMs that represents this theory, which may or may not, we believe it does, represent what actually goes on in the human mind. So I think that simulation of Sid's theory using low-level GPUs is a good, fruitful, I don't know, venue for research.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you.
Well, I'm looking for somebody to collaborate with on that project too. So
yeah, keep us posted when you have news.
Of course. I need to get through the summer. My own dissertation, I need to get through this summer, and then I'm done.
Yeah. Great. Any other opinions on that?
I think that that this theory should be increased the developments on discourse, the processes of comprehending and producing text, even in real language, in not LLMs, even in common day language. Some years ago, I applied some concepts to analyzing colloquiums of doctoral defenses, and I was surprised, astonished by the misunderstandings, talking to misunderstanding, with some theoretical concepts. One member of the jury has a certain framework of and another framework, and they discuss about a concept. I don't remember now one, but I could at that time appreciate the importance of design the neurocognitive relational networks of everyone, of the participants in this discussion. I think that phenomena are as intersubjectivity, communication is a great field to apply Sidney Lamb's notions, some Sidney Lamb's notions. Discourse analysis in general, discourse analysis, comprehension, production. But it's a great field.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
And again, for those of you who are interested in finding more details about this kind of research, as I said, Gisela will present some part of her research next month. Then Jose has already presented part of his work back in November. It was like a preview of his research, and he promised to come back and give us more details. So in the next few months, we will have several presentations on the relational network theory or on topics for which researchers have used this approach.
I would like to say just one thing that is, and it is that relational network theory is also very important from the philosophical point of view, because as far as I know, it's the only one linguistic theory that accounts for language as in biological terms and also in cultural terms. Language is both a system in the brain, and it's also a product of culture. As far as I know, it is the only one linguistic theory that is able to account for these two apparently contradictory facts.
Okay, great. So I think there might be some questions in the audience. So I think we can open it now for the Q&A session. Before that, at a certain moment, I put in the chat, but then I will send it by email also. But in the chat, you have the email where you should write me or us a message if you are not receiving our updates and you would like to receive our invitations for next for the following months. And so it's basically CLCC dot well, I lost it now.
I can redo
But
it
yeah,
now.
okay, it's in the chat. I think you can repost it. Thank you.
Yes.
So okay, I think I saw Professor Ionescu's hand.
Yes.
So please go ahead.
Yes, I was just writing in the chat, but I'm going to say a few words, if I may. First of all, well, I'm grateful. In fact, I'm grateful to to the organization of today's meeting. Why am I saying so? And thank you so much, Professor Buzila, first, for just making this possible to anyone who would have liked to join the meeting. I have been dealing with idioms a lot, in the last years, and I wonder, and I think I will go into them again, idiomatic phrases, because I'm thinking how they can be explained, interpreted from Professor Sidney Lamb's view, because the age-old, I would say, controversy was and is whether they are compositional or non-compositional. And from the conceptual point of view, they are not compositional because they are figurative by definition. They have a figurative meaning. Therefore, where that figurative meaning where does it come from? So I do hope not to find a definite answer, but I will go into them again from this new perspective. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So, and of course, we can provide all the materials we have, and if you need resources or bibliography, we can help that.
Yeah, there are doctoral students who are dealing with this issue. They have been, and there are two more now concerned about how to explain, the non-compositionality of the typical tick the bucket on the one hand, and compositionality of spill the beans, for instance, or any other structure which is verb transitive plus direct objects. These would be, let's say, the not easier, but the most transparent ones. But besides that, there are many others which go cross-linguistically, by the way, which I think would be fascinating to tackle them again from this new perspective, from neuro-linguistic point of view.
Yes, maybe if anyone has a quick comment on this, on idioms, maybe Gisela, you are working on meanings, or maybe Professor Lamb, you want to say quickly something about how R&T would deal with this kind of idioms?
Well, Professor Lam has dealt with this kind of idioms with the concept of fixed expression and variable expression. In your issue, you sent us an issue of 2016 and 2016 that Lam had a contribution, and Lam was cited also Adele Goldberg's work on constructional grammar. So I think it could be useful for Daniela Corina, her work.
Goldberg, not only, yes, and Evans as well, yeah.
Yes, as well, Evans, yes.
Thank you.
I'll mention one thing, which is in general, linguistic theories would have you either accept a compositional or a non-compositional lexemic account of these expressions, but most likely they will force you into an either or. So you either take it one way or the other. A benefit of the descriptional apparatus of R&T is that it allows you to have both mechanisms, if you will, at place. And I think that's a little bit closer to what we learn in general about how the human brain processes information. It is not the case that in the face of something, of a set of words whose combination becomes lexemized in a way so that it points to a meaning that's not derivable from the sum of its constituent parts, you cease grammatical processing. You still process the grammatical relations in it. And you know this because when there are experiments in which you have idioms and you manipulate their constituents, and the manipulation, if you go from something that's plural to something that's singular, or something that's in the present tense to something that's in the past tense, you see the same types of neurophysiological markers or hemodynamic markers that you observe when you have such manipulations in non-lexemic, non-idiomatic, non-figurative constructions. Even in daily linguistic behavior, the types of phonemic paraphasias or semantic paraphasias, other forms of, let's say, speech errors that you observe when you are producing non-formulaic, let's say, forms of speech, they also emerge when you are producing idioms. People make such slips and mistakes even within idioms. And in pathological discourse, some of the speech errors that appear subsequent to different forms of aphasia or linguistic disorders in non-primarily linguistic syndromes, they have also been attested for in idioms, for instance. So I think that the interesting thing here is that just because something behaves as an idiom does not mean that it ceases to behave as a compositional structure. And while most theories will force you out of one account or the other, the relational structure of R&T allows you to map both types of phenomena at the same time. I think that's an underexploited, perhaps notational, descriptive, and perhaps even explanatory benefit of the theory.
Thank you. Yes, yeah. The point is that, you know, the clinical aspects of, so there is no clinical aspect about an idiom. Such a structure that is about the respective union. Of course, there could be errors when, or on the contrary, there would be the so-called anti-proverbial type of phrasing when someone just wants to distort contextually some idiom, and this happens quite often in political language, I think in Romanian anyway. But besides that, the figurative meaning constructs itself as Professor Gisela Müller also mentioned, from the point of view of units of the phraseme as such. and or from the constructional perspective, as Goldberg says. So that is why I'm wondering, and not only wondering, but on the basis of the figurative meaning, which gives the definition of an idiom, because an idiom must be interpreted figuratively, the relations could be explained, well, neuro-linguistically, let's say. But of course, much more must be done in this respect. Yeah. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Professor Ionescu. And well, while it's getting quite late, let's say, I think there was a question in the chat that remained unanswered. John Paul Sang also asked something like this: does a binary branching tree really even look like any natural tree you see in the woods? It certainly doesn't seem to parallel anything neuro. Oh, okay, so it was a comment, not actually a question. Yeah. So I saw the question mark, and or maybe if you want to comment more on that, John, if you can use your mic.
I don't know if I have anything particularly deep to say, but certainly back way in the day when I learned about transformational grammar from a textbook that was called Programmed Learning, it was pretty cool. It was like you would have a unit of instruction and then a question, and you could see the answer on a following page, and so it would quiz you while you're reading all through it. It was pretty cool. Transformational grammar seemed to just, open my mind to how language seems to work in the mind. But when I found browsing around in a library, I found a stratificational grammar book. I'm like, whoa, this is way more looking like what goes on in my head. Oh yeah. And the binary branching thing, okay, it seems like a useful notation for description of a phenomena and figuring things out that way. But certainly doesn't look like anything neurological. I mean, can you see these, binary branching things running around in your head, all connected, these binary branching trees that don't even look like natural trees? Doesn't seem right to me. Thank you.
Thank you, JP, for these comments. All right, so is there any other question that you really want to
Yes, if I may, just 1 minute, I won't take long, but I'm very curious about something, because at one point I learned that the process of learning is based upon the creation of new connections, which seemed very logical for me, and I took it as truth without any questions, but after reading your paper regarding relational network theory, now I understand that it's actually done by reinforcing through a Hebbian type mechanism in already existent latent connections. So can you please share a bit about these existing latent connections, because I'm really curious.
Well, if Professor Lam, maybe you can briefly comment on that.
I'm sorry, I can't. Not right away.
Okay.
Well, I can say.
Have to give me some time to think about it.
I can take a stab at it too. Yeah.
I can say 2 quick things about this.
Yeah, please.
Irrespective of how relational network theory accounts for learning, you started with the assumption, you said, I thought that learning occurs through the creation of new connections. That is true. It's also true that learning occurs through the reinforcement of new connections. I mean, neurologically, that is true. It is also true that learning occurs through the weakening of existing connections. That is true. It is also true that learning occurs through the emergence of new neurons, not only during gestation, but also in the adult human brain, especially in the hippocampus and the dentate gyrus. There is neurogenesis, and Hebbian mechanisms are in place as well. So in terms of neurobiological structures, neuroplasticity is not a one-size-fits-all mechanism, but it's a collection of mechanisms. And all of these, they are more or less prominent depending on the maturational stage of the individual. So neurogenesis is absolutely predominant during gestation and in the first months of life, for instance. But then it's a very, very low prevalence mechanism in adult brains, especially in older adults. But usually what you observe is that learning, and whatever type of learning you're talking about, reinforced learning, observational learning, mimetic learning, inferential learning, encyclopedic learning, motor learning, visuospatial learning, whatever it might be, it always involves a combination of these different mechanisms in terms of their neurobiological implementation.
Thank you, Adolfo. A good answer.
Yes,
Thank you.
All right. So we are just 10 minutes over the scheduled time, and I would like to thank you all so much for being with us tonight. I hope it was a useful 2 hours for everybody. It was definitely a useful and a pleasant period for me. So again, thank you, Professor Lamb. Thank you to all my colleagues from Análisis de Lingüística. Thanks for everybody in the audience. Thank you for your interest in RNT and language matters in general. As I said, if you want to receive updates from CELINE, don't hesitate to drop an email to that address in the chat. And hope to see you soon. Stay tuned. We'll be back with more interesting topics and speakers. And thanks again. I hope you have a great evening, a great day, and hope to see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Okay, I'd like to add my thanks. Thank you to everybody for all your very original and interesting thoughts.
Thank you to
Thank
you,
you.
Professor Lam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Have a great day, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.